Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have another episode of Cosmere Fight Club. Now I haven't done one of these videos in a little bit. I think I only ever actually did one, to be honest. But this one, as a result of reading Tress of the Emerald Sea, I kind of want to, get a little Fight Club mental exploration-y a little bit. So yeah, so today in this Cosmere Fight Club, we're going to talk about who would win in the fight, a Sprouter or a Sandmaster. So this video will of course have probably, I don't know, maybe there will be mild spoilers for White Sand and for Tress, but probably just only, mechanical magic system type things. So yeah, as always, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, Sandmaster versus Sprouter. Let's go through their particular abilities first before we kind of speculate how the fight will go. Sandmasters. Sandmasters are people who use the magic system on the planet Teldane, where on that planet, on the day side, because it is a tidally locked planet where one side faces a white dwarf and the other side faces a giant, basically two different suns. One side faces one side, and the other faces the other side. So on the planet that is day side, the giant star is constantly feeding investiture to the world, and there are these microorganisms that live on the sand that collect investiture, and it allows anyone with a connection directly to it and it appears to be kind of genetic too, like their level of ability to control the sand. They can essentially master the sand and telekinetically control it to get different effects. So the power level of this ability varies. There's a character that can only control one ribbon of sand, which is just one like string of sand, essentially, just a finite amount. Whereas there are others who can control up to a dozen or 2 dozen ribbons of sand, which of course give them greater variety of the things they can do and give them a greater level of multitask ability. So it makes them a much more formidable threat than it would for someone who only can control a few ribbons of sand. So for this versus, I want to speculate about someone who can only control 6 ribbons of sand. That is someone who I think would be at like a lower to moderate level of power. So, and I want to put them up against a Sprouter. So in Tress of the Emerald Sea, we learn what a Sprouter is. A Sprouter is someone that is a member of the crew on a ship that sails the seas of Lumar, the Spore Seas. And they're someone that actually, with great bravery, goes and deal with spores. They actually actively use them, and they will try to manipulate them, and they try to control them, and essentially they're the master of the spores on the boat. So we learned that the sprouter can basically develop a skill set with it because you learn more about what the aethers do and how to use them and stuff like that. So therefore, you can become a combatant using them, as we kind of saw in the book. So I was thinking about the fact that these two magic systems, these two forms of expressed investiture use, are very similar. I think it is not really confirmed, but I think it is as confirmed as we probably need it to be, that the Sandmasters use the Luel bond just like anyone that is a aether bound who uses spores. So like with the Midnight Essence, you essentially transfer water to the Midnight Aether in order to gain control of it. With Sandmaster, you give up the moisture in your body in order to gain control of the sand. So I think they work essentially the same. And both of the nature of the investiture comes from like investiture being absorbed by this organic material. There's this like lichen type material that's on the sand that absorbs investiture the same way the spores are essentially that material itself. So as far as we know, the the sand in Taldane could actually have what is essentially a form of aether that coats the sand. So that could be really interesting. But that's just more romantic speculation and, magic system connection and crossover. But so I want to speculate about the idea of a Sprouter who only has access to red and emerald, who only have verdant and crimson, red and green. So they only have the ability to make the vines and the rosite kind of crystal formations. So I figured that would be an easy, not easy, but a fair person and power level to go up against someone who can only master 6 strands. So we have our setup. We have a Sandmaster who has only mastered 6 ribbons of sand, who can only do so much with those 6 ribbons, and they have a average level of multitasking ability. And we have a Sprouter who is as experienced as Tress is, but who only has access to emerald and rosite aether. So they can only make sprouts or hard crystals. So I think the primary thing in this kind of battle that would determine the winner is who can control their resources the best. Not only the sources of sand that still have investiture on them, because when you use white sand, you use the investiture, and after it's drained black, it can no longer be controlled. So there has to be some sort of conscious understanding of resource management, just like with a sprouter who has to use water to activate their spores, but they also have to use water to activate their spores. But because this sprouter in this scenario doesn't have access to midnight aether, they are not creating a Luell bond, so they don't have to worry about the loss of moisture from their body the way the Sandmaster does. So it's an interesting limitation that both of them have, and apart from not being able to give any visuals like I would really like to. I wish I was an animator. That'd be so fun to do. Who knows how long that would take, though, when you think about it. But, so the way I see it playing out, essentially, is the Sandmaster will immediately take to the sky using their sands to also to basically fly. And in this situation, I would think that the Sandmaster would have limited access to the amount of white sand that they have, just like the sprouter would have limited access to the type of spores that they would have to use. So it would, continuously even out the battle, essentially. But I would think that the Sandmaster would, of course, use their ribbon to float up in the air and immediately start using their other ribbons just as full blunt force attacks in order to end this battle quickly because their resources are so finite. So I can see them taking the high ground and making basically sand spears and immediately going and going. And then, of course, after that, if the sprouter has enough versatility with their with their resources and stuff and knowledge of it, I could see them using the water that they have with enough crimson spores or red spores to essentially throw up a wall of rosite to basically give themselves a shield against all the daggers of sand, essentially. And depending on what fine control they may have of the red aether, they could probably break off pieces and use them as throwing weapons. I could see something like that happening, but I think that skill level would be beyond Tress. But that is definitely an offensive way they could use those, assuming that the water that they use initially causes the spore, the aether, to express itself entirely. So that would be a good opening bout going back and forth. And then once the sprouter goes on the offensive, we've seen Sandmasters use an amount of sand to basically create a whirling dome around themselves to create a shield. So they both basically have even defensive abilities. So they have similar offensive abilities, but almost equally matched defensive abilities. So then the situation, I think, would have to change to where they would have to strategize a way to get around all of that. Because this scenario, as I've created on purpose, it leaves them pretty even. So I would think ultimately the battle will have to come down to a capture scenario. So if the Sandmaster has enough sand, I could see them essentially trying to get rid of the water that the sprouter has, or spread their spores out in such a way where they can't use them as efficiently in order to hinder their resource management. Similarly, the sprouter would have to essentially wear out the master in order for them to dehydrate themselves, assuming they don't have extra water, in order to help eliminate their resources. But I think the thing that the sprouter ultimately has over the Sandmaster is the fact that they can use verdant aether. So if the sprouter is smart enough and clever enough, similar to Tress that we've seen, I could see a scenario in which that they could get the green spores around the Sandmaster, so when they come down or when they start to run out of sand that they have available to master, that the sprouter can essentially throw water on the green spores near the Sandmaster and cause the vines to capture them like we've seen them do before. So that would ultimately have to be the way the battle would end, where the sprouter would have to work towards a capture if they're limited to these number of spores. And if you do it at a proper time, then the Sandmaster will be dehydrated enough that he couldn't even do anything about it. Because if it's not done at the perfect time, then the master could theoretically use a sand ribbon to cut through the vines and free themselves. So it's a really interesting situation. I really wonder what other scenarios could play out with this. So let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree with the way I theorize this battle will play out, that the sprouter will ultimately win by a capture? What other scenarios and what other ways do you think that battle could go with those limitations? So given those limitations, how do you think the battle would play out? Do you agree with me that it would be similar to the way I've described, or do you think it would go totally different? Let me know about that in the comments down below. So next time we're going to talk about two different magic systems, two different worlds, probably two totally different eras, and we're going to match them up and see, based on the information that we have about the magic systems and the mechanics, which one could we speculate will win. So make sure you hit the like button and you're subscribed to the channel so that you can catch that video. So as always, I will talk to you all next time. Peace.